When they returned to D.C., the residents of D.C. were shocked to see their men with arms blown off, eyes gone, moaning in the marching, and essentially just agonizingly traumatic moments that these men would never forget. So what would become of these 2nd Wisconsin men? Remember, they're not in the Iron Brigade yet, but this battle proved their mettle as to who they were going to become. How would they finish the war? How could they finish this rebellion? How would they fight for their friends and their comrades? How would they do it? While Colonel Kuhn's 2nd Wisconsin Volunteers were preparing to depart from Camp Randall, the towns and villages of Wisconsin continued to stir. In Baraboo in Sauk County, the organization of a 3-month company had begun at a meeting on Saturday evening, April 19th. A few nights later, a second meeting was called for the Sauk County Courthouse, where speeches were made by the leading citizens, and the proprietor of the Baraboo Republic was so moved that he volunteered to furnish one recruit armed with a Sharps rifle. The recruit, of course, to be one of the employees of the newspaper, was elected by the members of the company, and the name Sauk County Rifleman was adopted, where the organization continued a captain and a first lieutenant. Drawn in 4-horse wagons and accompanied by Raleigh's town band, the riflemen departed for Reedsburg, where 10 more volunteers signed up. Merrimack and Delton were the next communities visited, and again recruiting was fruitful. Public subscriptions for support of the soldiers' families amounted to $6,000 during the first week of organization. By May 4th, the organization of the Sauk County Company was virtually completed. The men drilled in Baraboo before the Thrawn speeches were made, and the women of Baraboo presented each man with a tasteful and beautiful rosette in the national colors. The soldiers gave 3 cheers for the ladies, and the company was dismissed, to reassemble a few days later for drill in Reedsburg, where the newly elected captain, Mexican war veteran A.G. Malloy, was presented with a sword by the citizenry. The men then moved on to Delton for a citizens' picnic and then to Prairie du Sac. From there, the heroes were conveyed to Sauk City by 24 teams of horses belonging to the citizens. When the company returned to Baraboo, 108 men had enrolled, including 4 of the 6 sons of a Virginia-born citizen of Excelsior. As the Sauk County men waited in Baraboo for orders to report to Madison, living as guests in the homes of the citizens, word was received that no further 3-month companies were needed. The entire company enlisted at once for 3 years. The mustering officer arrived in Baraboo on June 10th and enrolled the men in impressive ceremonies at which the citizens presented the company with a silk United States flag. At last, the day of departure for Camp Randall arrived. An event that attracted the largest crowd in the history of Baraboo. 2,000 people gathered to watch the Baraboo Fire Company escort the soldiers to the train. to hear the choir of the Reverend Thompson, to hear an original poem, and to see the Sauk County Bible Society present each soldier with a pocket testament. The Sauk County Riflemen arrived in Madison in mid-June, their uniforms consisting only of gray caps trimmed with green. At Camp Randall, the men were issued an all-gray short-jacket uniform paid for by the state, with a headpiece described by one of the men as a plug hat with a huge pompon on the front at the top. Assigned to the 6th Wisconsin Volunteers, then in the process of organization, the Riflemen became Company A of the regiment. Over in Juneau County, Governor Randall's call was heard by a 22-year-old Ohioan who was visiting in Wisconsin with his father. Rufus R. Dawes knew Wisconsin, having attended the University of Wisconsin at Madison for 2 years before returning to Marietta, Ohio, to complete his schooling at Marietta College. Dawes also knew something of citizens in arms. His great-grandfather was no less a person than William Dawes, who had ridden south from Boston on the night of April 18, 1775, as Paul Revere rode north toward Lexington and Concord. Drawing up a pledge for volunteers for an unlimited time, Dawes began recruiting on April 25th. He had posters prepared, and with a sense of his own history, announced enlistments wanted for the Lemonweir Minutemen. He was joined in his efforts by John A. Kellogg of Mauston, the Juneau County prosecutor, 33-year-old Pennsylvania-born and the grandson of a Revolutionary soldier. Kellogg had entered Wisconsin Territory in 1840, and although a meager formal education, had successfully read law and been admitted to the bar in the Prairie du Sac. At the Madison Convention of the New Republican Party in 1855, Kellogg had been a member. This experience and his successful campaign for the prosecutor's position had given him a wide acquaintance in the state. By April 30th, Dawes and Kellogg had succeeded in enlisting 100 men, including many raftsmen from the pioneeries in the area. Rugged men of the outdoors whom Dawes was especially glad to have at the Mauston meeting in which the company was formally organized, Dawes and Kellogg were elected captain and first lieutenant without opposition. After a spirited campaign, the remaining officers were also elected. Then began the efforts to be mustered in. Influential citizens were dispatched to Madison, and Dawes himself went to wait upon the governor. Finally, orders having arrived, the company entrained for Madison on July 6th, assigned to the 6th Wisconsin Volunteers. Each of the members of the company boarded the train armed with a pincushion made by the ladies of Marietta, Ohio, and forwarded to Dawes, Marietta's native son. Dawes' company was the last of the 10 companies assigned to the 6th Wisconsin to arrive at Camp Randall. Undrilled and without uniforms, the Minutemen were not an opposing sight, Dawes said. The men stumbled along in 2 ranks, kicking each other's heels. A few wore broadcloth and silk hats, more the red shirts of raftsmen. Several wore a country homespun. One had on a calico coat, and another was looking through a hole in the drooping brim of a straw hat. The men carried every variety of valise and every species of bundle, down to the one shirt tied up in a red handkerchief. As the company approached Camp Randall, they were met by 2,000 men of the 5th and 6th Wisconsin Volunteers, drawn up in line of battle to welcome the newcomers. Frank A. Haskell, the regimental adjutant of the 6th Wisconsin, mounted splendidly uniformed and already soldierly in his bearing. Haskell directed Dawes to form the company in column by platoon and march to headquarters under the escort of Hibbard's Milwaukee Zouaves of the 5th Wisconsin, the best drilled military company in the state. In the first of many different situations in his military career, Dawes responded that he would be glad to comply, but it is simply impossible. Thereupon, accompanied by the Zouaves, the Minutemen walked at their own gait to headquarters, where Colonel Lysander Cutler of Milwaukee greeted them. Colonel Cutler advised Dawes that his company was designated as Company K of the regiment, but unofficially the Minutemen had already been christened by their 6th Wisconsin comrades. The name was Company Q. As the Juneau County men looked around at Camp Randall, they learned something of their 6th Wisconsin comrades. 2 of the companies of the regiment were from Milwaukee, each composed exclusively of members of one national group. Company D was the Irish Company, known as the Montgomery Guards. Company F, the Citizens Corps Milwaukee, was composed of Germans. Both of its lieutenants had European military experience. Another German unit was Company H, the Buffalo County Rifles. Its captain, J.F. Hauser, had been educated at the military school of Thun in Switzerland, was a veteran of European warfare, and had been on Garibaldi's staff. The German officers were not the only veteran soldiers of the regiment. Colonel Lysander Cutler, 53 years old, but as rugged as a wolf, according to Captain Dawes, had commanded Maine militia troops during the Aroostook Indian Wars of 1838 and 1839. Although born in Worcester County, Massachusetts, Cutler had lived most of his colorful life in Maine. Reared on a farm, he had also learned the clothier's trade, surveyed and taught school, having founded his own woolen mill in 1843. Cutler made a fortune within 10 years. Then his mill burned down and the fortune disappeared with it. Undaunted, he succeeded in rebuilding the mill and in enlarging his holdings to embrace other factories, tenements, a foundry, a gristmill, and a sawmill. As a leading businessman, Cutler was elected to the Maine Senate, college trusteeships, and a railroad directorship. But he also was financially ruined by the Panic of 1856 and moved to Milwaukee to start his career over again. Edward S. Bragg of Fond du Lac, the major of the Sixth, destined to be a national political figure after the war. Bragg was a native of New York, where he had been educated at Geneva College and admitted to the bar. Entering Wisconsin in 1850 at the age of 23, Bragg had at once become active in Democratic politics. Had been elected prosecuting attorney of Fond du Lac County and a Douglas delegate to the 1860 Democrat Convention at Charleston. Frank A. Haskell, who had greeted Dawes' company at Camp Randall, was also to be closely identified with the Iron Brigade. On July 16th, fully equipped by the state except for arms, the regiment was mustered into federal service. 1,084 men strong. On August 23rd, they were reviewed by Brigadier General Rufus King, to whose command the 6th Wisconsin, 5th Wisconsin, 19th Indiana had been assigned. Dawes believed that the regiment had made a poor impression, largely because of that contemptible brass band of ours, which played so slowly that as the soldiers passed the reviewing stand, we had to hold one leg in the air and balance on the other while we waited for the music. On August 26th, the men of the 6th got their first view of General McClellan when he reviewed all the troops encamped on Meridian Hill. In an example of the strange personal attraction that McClellan possessed, one of the men of the 6th wrote a letter home that day about how the boys are all carried away with enthusiasm for McClellan. The 6th Wisconsin left their encampment on Meridian Hill on September 2nd and moved to a position near the Chain Bridge. Remaining on the Maryland side of the bridge, they were engaged throughout September picket duty between the Chain Bridge and Falling Rivers. William Ray of Lancaster, Wisconsin, was also one of the most notable members of the 7th Wisconsin Infantry Regiment. Born in the western part of Wisconsin near the Mississippi River, he joined up as many other boys would, a sense of adventure, to preserve the Union, and later to destroy the institution of slavery. But to mention him briefly, we'll discuss him in later parts of the series, but I just wanted to mention him a bit before we get into the weeds here of who William Ray actually was. The men of the 7th Wisconsin began to arrive in Madison late in August. Several of the companies were from the same counties from which the 2nd and 6th Wisconsin had been recruited, including Grant County, Columbia County, and Rock County. Indeed, Rock County, on the Illinois line, and with the communities of Beloit and Janesville, was to have companies in all three of the Wisconsin Iron Brigade regiments. Other companies arriving at Camp Randall for the 7th were from counties unrepresented in the 2nd and 6th regiments. Some of the men in Company A, the Lodi Guards, were from far-off Chippewa County in the northwestern part of the state. Lieutenant Colonel William Wallace Robinson of Sparta, Wisconsin, came to command the 7th Wisconsin. He was a Vermonter, 42 years old, claimed Mayflower Pilgrim descent, and whose father had been a wounded veteran of the War of 1812. Robinson had attended several schools in Vermont, including the Academy at Norwich. After finishing his own education, he had been a teacher in New Jersey and then in Cleveland, Ohio, before he headed west for gold. Returning to Ohio in time to be commissioned a lieutenant in the 3rd Ohio Infantry for the Mexican War, he had ended the war as a captain and had again set out for California in the gold fields in 1852. Employed in California by a Minnesota utility corporation, Robinson returned to Minnesota, founded the town of Wilton, and was commissioned a colonel in the state militia. It was not until 1858 that he moved to Wisconsin, but he had friends there, and his Mexican War experience commended him to Wisconsin's governor. Charles A. Hamilton of Milwaukee, the first major of the 7th, was the most well-descended man in the regiment. Alexander Hamilton had been his grandfather, and his father was a prosperous New York City lawyer. Charles had attended schools in New York City and abroad in England and Germany. After admission to the bar in New York, he had come to Milwaukee in 1851 and had developed a highly successful practice there. He was 35 years old in 1861 and a leader of the Wisconsin bar. When Hamilton moved up to become lieutenant colonel in the promotions following Van Dorn's resignation, George Bill, a Mexican War veteran from the town of Lodi, and originally a captain in Company A, was promoted to major. On September 21st, having been mustered in for 3 years, the 10 companies of the 7th Wisconsin, 1,106 officers and men, entrained for Washington. The firing on Sumter found Indiana full of enthusiasm, but little less of the wherewithal for war. Most enthusiastic was Indiana's fire-eating chief executive, who was determined that Indiana's response to Lincoln's proclamation would be spectacular. On April 15th, Governor Oliver P. Morton signaled the state's official reaction with a telegram to the president. On behalf of the state of Indiana, I tender to you for the defense of the nation and to uphold the authority of the government 10,000 men. Then, just as Governor Randall had done in Wisconsin, Morton sought out a prominent Democrat to identify with the cause. To the vacant post of Adjutant General, he appointed Lew Wallace of Crawfordsville, a widely known lawyer and Mexican War veteran. One of Lew Wallace's first duties was to find a site for the encampment of Indiana soldiers. He selected the state fairgrounds, 36 acres on the northern outskirts of Indianapolis, and named the place Camp Morton. To Camp Morton had come the first 6 3-months regiments numbered 6 through 11, out of respect to the 5 regiments of Hoosiers who had volunteered for the Mexican War. In July of 1861, the 19th Indiana Volunteers followed them, before an enlistment of 3 years. Although one company was from Elkhart County, adjoining the Michigan line near South Bend, the volunteers of the 19th Indiana were largely from communities in the central portion of the state, such as Winchester, Muncie, Indianapolis, Franklin, and Spencer. The soldiers of the 19th had their own difficulty in adjusting to the strange ways of a military system. Dissatisfied with the food provided at the camp, they rallied to destroy the commissary. The colonel of another regiment ordered out a guard detail and directed the men of the 19th to disperse, an order the soldiers at first refused on the ground that the officer was not their colonel and was without any authority to order them about. The man who the soldiers of the 19th would presumably have obeyed their own colonel was Solomon Meredith of Wayne County's Cambridge City, a town close to Richmond, Indiana. Later to be closely identified with the Iron Brigade, Meredith was 6 feet 7 inches tall, slender, and although in his early 50s, as straight as a ramrod. An uneducated and unpropertied North Carolina Quaker who had come to Indiana in 1840, his first Indiana activity was farming, but his real talent was for politics. During the years between his coming into Indiana and the outbreak of the war, Meredith had been twice elected county sheriff, elected the state legislator, and appointed a United States Marshal. At the outbreak of the war, he was again in public office, this time as a clerk of Wayne County. Like Governor Morton, Solomon Meredith had left the Democratic Party during the 1850s, and by the 1860s was the leader of the victorious Republicans. At the Republican State Convention of 1860, it was Meredith who moved the nomination of Henry S. Lane for governor and accepted an amendment to his motion to include Morton for lieutenant governor. On Governor Lane's election to the United States Senate in 1861, Morton had assumed his governorship. He and Solomon Meredith were friends. In Indiana's fraction-torn Republican Party, this meant that Meredith, like Morton, was the object of the barbs of the factional press, which decried his military ambitions as brazen impudence and sublime effrontery, and labeled his appointment a damnable swindle. It was also suggested that Long's soul be cut in two so that his lower and better half could be appointed lieutenant colonel of the regiment. But the colonel survived these outcries, and in fact it was said that the 19th Indiana was Governor Morton's pet regiment, because the governor, like Colonel Meredith, was from Wayne County, and because Company B of the 19th was composed of Wayne County men. The 19th's lieutenant colonel was Robert A. Cameron of Valparaiso, Indiana. A native of New York, 33 years old, he had come to Porter County, Indiana in 1843 and had graduated in 1850 from the Indiana Medical College at La Porte. Thereafter, licensed as a physician, his practice had flourished in Valparaiso. Cameron's political background was also typical of the one-time Jacksonian stronghold of Indiana. An ardent Democrat until the Kansas-Nebraska issue, he had then turned to the new Republican Party and devoted his considerable talents and energies there. In 1857, he purchased the Valparaiso Observer, changed its name to the Republic, and published and edited the paper until 1861, when he took his seat in the Indiana House of Representatives, to which he had been elected in 1860. Along with medicine, publishing, and politics, Cameron had long harbored a military interest and had missed the Mexican War only because Indiana's regimental quotas were filled. But in 1861, he went into the 9th Indiana, a 3-month regiment, and obtained a captain's commission. This led to his lieutenant colonelcy in the 19th, where it was soon discovered that 2 unusually strong and assertive men like Solomon Meredith and Robert A. Cameron were too many. In February of 1862, Cameron was to leave the 19th to become the colonel of the 34th Indiana. A Lewis O. Bachman was commissioned as major of the 19th and became its lieutenant colonel on Cameron's transfer in February 1862. Bachman was a native Hoosier, born in Madison, Indiana in 1839, the child of well-to-do Swiss, who were among the early settlers of Indiana. Entering Hanover College in 1856, Bachman studied for 2 years with the announced ambition of practicing law. He was known in the college community for his skills in debating and public speaking. After Hanover, Bachman enrolled at Kentucky Military Institute at Frankfort and continued there for 2.5 years. During the summers in Madison, he had organized a military company, the Madison City Grays, and drilled his men regularly. In 1861, Bachman and the Grays enlisted in the 6th Indiana Volunteers and spent their 3-month term of enlistment in the early Western Virginia actions. Upon the expiration of this enlistment, Bachman received his commission as Major of the 19th. Arriving in Washington on August 9th with a total roster of 1,046 men, the 19th joined the encampment on Kalorama Heights and was assigned at once to the brigade of Brigadier General Rufus King, along with the 5th and 6th Wisconsin regiments. Hey guys, how's it going? Thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. I know it took me a long time to make this, but part 2 is finally here. I'd just like to say thank you so much for sharing my content and sharing and subscribing and everything like that. Again, thank you for your patience. I know it took a long time. Honestly, it took 1.5 years to do this because I had other stuff going on in my life. And I just wanted to say thank you guys. And I encourage you, if you like this video, share it to everybody that you know if they're into the Civil War, U.S. history, that 9 yards. And I just wanted to share you guys a little bit of something. I just got this for my birthday, and I'll turn around. And as you can see, it shows the Iron Brigade. And you can see the battles that they fought in. And so I just wanted to share that with you guys because I feel it's pretty fitting to show that to you guys because it's something that I'm very passionate about. Again, guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your patience. Part 2 is finally here, and the research continues. The series is not over yet. We're going to go deeper now into the personal stories of one of the soldiers of the Iron Brigade, and his name will be William Ray of the 7th Wisconsin. So this will be part 2. We'll also do the military history, but we're also going to go with the personal one as well, because William Ray's story is very fascinating to see. As they quote, like, the perspective of a soldier from the Civil War's most fightingest unit of the Union. So I just want to say thank you to you guys. Have a good weekend. Have a great night. I'll see you in the next episode.